This podcast is brought to you by Mighty Capital, the go-to venture capital firm for product-first companies like Airbnb, DigitalOcean, and Amplitude, who says we're the best value for the dollar invested. Learn more at mighty.capital. Hi, I'm SC Moadi, founder and chair of Products That Count, a 501c3 nonprofit whose mission is to help everyone build great products through original research, coveted industry awards, and exceptional programming, such as this show. Products That Count accelerate the career of 500,000 product managers worldwide and helps leading brands such as Cisco, SoFi, and J&J turn their product teams into a competitive advantage. Learn more about how your company can get involved at productsthatcount.org. Welcome to Product Talk, an Apple Top 500, Webby Honoré, and Forbes Top 15 tech podcast. This program's sole focus is to define what makes a great product. While it seems like a simple question, the answers are complex. So we turn to C and VP level product executives and invite them to host interviews on the themes of building products, from maximizing engagement to prioritizing features to encouraging diversity. You'll hear these product leaders in conversation with executive peers from companies like Netflix, Coinbase, and Box. My hope is that together, we build a world where everyone uses products that count. Are you ready? Let's hear today's episode and meet our hosts and their guests.
Greetings, everyone. I am Hoda Mehr, CEO of Products That Count, and I have an extra special guest today. The guest today is Senior Vice President of Product at Okta CPO Sampaio, and he's an alumni of many great tech companies you, I'm sure, have heard of: Apple, DigitalOcean, and many others. An extremely technical senior product leader, and I'm super excited to have him on the show. Cassio, welcome to the show.
Hoda, thank you so much for having me. You're setting a very high bar, saying extra special, extremely technical, like you may be setting up like for like an interesting session here.
It is going to be an interesting session, and you truly deserve it. Hey, everyone, you don't know this, but I'm going to get you into a little thing that we did yesterday, a roundtable we did with Cassio, and we invited some product leaders from an advisory board members and talked about security, customer identity, challenges related to balancing customer identity and engagement. And the reason I say extra special guest, extra technical, is because Cassio was the guest speaker in that roundtable, and we had a fantastic conversation. He asked fantastic questions and also very thought-provoking questions in that roundtable. So actually, that's a really good segue, because we want to share with all of you who are watching and listening to this podcast a sample of yesterday's conversation from Roundtable and some of the highlights of the conversation of yesterday. And we're going to dig into Cassio's background. He has some very interesting stories. He was I'll tell you soon, but he was almost like a James Bond of product management in early part of his career. So we'll definitely keep that in mind to talk about it. And then, we will take the conversation around the differences between technical product management and, B2C consumer-facing product management. So that would be a really jam-packed and interesting discussion today. Cassio, why don't we start from yesterday's roundtable? What was the highlight of yesterday's conversation for you?
Yeah, it was such a great, very meaty discussion with the participants yesterday, and we're really trying to get to I was trying to get different perspectives on how do you balance exactly what you said. How do you balance? I live in the world of customer identity, right? So you are an e-commerce platform. How do you sign up customers without creating friction? But how do you also prevent account takeover? How do you prevent abuse on your systems? How do you balance those those two forces? And it was fascinating that as the conversation progressed, halfway through it, we landed in this concept that we use a lot at Okta. We've used this concept for over 4 years now, that the customer identity experience in particular is a balance of not only user experience or convenience, like as it's being called, user experience security, but also privacy. And the privacy component is when you say it, it's obvious, but a lot of times it's left as like a secondary consideration. And then guess what? GDPR, compliance, data residency, like right to be forgotten, or even government specific attestation or regulation like FedRAMP in the United States or IRAP in Australia, SMAP in Japan. If you don't think about privacy, you end up with designing something that may just not make the cut, right? In terms of what the different expectations. We talked a lot about what it means, and we will talk about the same topic more generally in terms of what it means to build a complex technology, a tech product in B2B SaaS. But we spend a lot of time on this too, because it's becoming harder, right? If you think about it, the beauty of SaaS is you build a product like once, you sell that everywhere, you have high leverage, etc. And a lot of those things are not, maybe when we talk about this in a thought-provoking way, maybe they're not true like anymore. Because now to go to a different geography, even within the country, right? You have different states, they have different bars, they have different like regulations. So there's so much in flux in there. But it was great that everyone in the session was very much aligned towards like this notion that in customer identity, if the experience is not great, invisible, like if you will, nobody loves to spend time signing up. That's what someone said in there. Ready to watch something on your favorite streaming service, you're ready to buy some stuff because we all need to buy more stuff like in that, you just want to do it, right? Filling forms, it's not something that nobody loves. So how do you make it simpler? How do you make it faster? Leveraging things like passkeys. We talk about how passkeys could be transformational in the space. So yeah, very, very engaging conversation.
Yes, actually, you mentioned a few things that I really liked from yesterday's conversation. One thing that maybe we want to dig a little bit further is that this notion of expectations on a consumer side, but then the technical challenges and regulatory challenges on the back end that product leaders like yourself on your teams have to solve for. But at the same time, people sitting in front of the app, or when they, to your point, they were trying to get to the YouTube videos or the videos, the streaming videos that they want to get, they don't really care about. They're just all in that mode of make it faster, make it now. I want to just do it now. But then on the technical side, it's a lot more challenging. And now we have the regulatory. I'd love to hear a little bit of your thoughts and perspective on that technical side. What are those challenges and what are those, we talked about data residency, we talked about regulatory on all that cloud versus non-cloud. Could you walk us through what are those challenges that a product leader needs and the product management team needs to consider that the consumers or users don't see, but they're critical in order to make sure it's secure and it's delivered in the right way?
It's a topic that I love. If you look at my background, I spent pretty much all of my career working on cloud computing, high performance networking, security, all things that are very much infrastructure. And I believe identity is in the same tier, like of service, if you will. And you can even go beyond just separating B2B technology or technical products versus non-technical to things that look more closely to the cloud layer, like identity. Because at the end of the day, the only reason why cloud works, such a bold statement, right? Like we want to use a cloud. Cloud works for a variety of different reasons, but one of the key reasons why it's useful today is that it delivers very low latency, delivers elastic performance, right? Like you can scale up, you can scale down, like etc., and it's extremely reliable. Now we can get into an argument like, is it better than on-prem or not? Like investment-wise, like some of the analysts like now attribute more dollars going to cloud computing versus on-prem, but let's not get into that philosophical like debate. But that's the essence of like when you're building a product like at this layer, those are the considerations. And as an end user, the end user just click the button and the thing has to go. It just has to happen. But for me as a product manager in that space, I need to think in terms of very like technical like guidelines for the engineering teams. You're typically talking consumer products about the outcomes being very only business focused, right? Very like I want to drive more signups, I want to drive more conversion, and all of those things apply when my customers are using my customer identity product. But when I'm talking to my engineering teams about what to build, we need very specific guidance in terms of what is the P99 for latency, like on a specific transaction, like a refresh token, like being issued. Like, is it 20 milliseconds? It's certainly not 300 milliseconds, right? Because we know there's a lot of research, like the things tend to get like over a few hundred milliseconds. Like it really becomes hard for you to stack a bunch of components on top and still deliver something that users will accept. You talk about SLAs, you talk about availability. This notion that you can shut down business for a few hours of the day for maintenance, it's just never the case. So we need to be up. Sure, SLAs for nines, but the expectation of availability, we use this notion within Okta that we call tier 0 service. Our service is tier 0, so it has to be there. It has to be there all the time. You can make the argument that a lot of this is also important when you're building consumer products. But when you build a consumer product, you're typically delegating that to people like us. So we are on the receiving end, like as a technology stack, and we have to think really hard about this. And that's not even before we get into the other conversation around regulation, data residency, the geopolitical. Remember, yesterday we talked a lot about the changes in the geopolitical like environment. You have specific like regions that are very, very heavy, very hard rules now. You either like my territory or not. Different approaches to encryption that don't necessarily like gel like well, like with us, like in places like US, Canada, and Western Europe. Anyhow, it's an increasingly complex world. And the last thing we discussed yesterday was very interesting, was that potentially the bar for a technology SaaS company to be successful, of course, is a higher bar right now, but it may be coming so high they may actually start to be detrimental to upstarts, like in the space to succeed, because then it's not only about the technology capability, but you need the legal like expertise, like in-house, to be able to navigate this. You need compliance capability. Think about security. Like you need to be able to navigate an increasingly complex security environment. So it's a level of additional investment that may be very difficult for companies that are just starting to be able to afford and be successful.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, I remember from yesterday's conversation, we had this like look back from future and kind of let's imagine what would be the future of security look like. And to your point, this is sort of the context of what you were talking about. There may not be, and we may not having things on the cloud may not be relevant anymore. And then all these companies invested significantly on transitioning from on-prem to sort of cloud, and then now we have this pause moment and everybody is evaluating because of data residency issues, because of security, data access, and geopolitical aspect of designing products, is stepping back and thinking about, do we actually want to be on the cloud, and what are the implications of being on the cloud from a security point?
Yeah, it's interesting because the having spent some time in cloud computing, it's become so difficult for anyone, any entity, any company that doesn't have the scale of the hyperscalers to build anything at an economical pricing point, because it's having had the privilege of sitting across the table from some vendors discussing prices like for like hard drives. Yes, people, you still buy hard drives because if you want to deploy for S3 type of data stores, like you still use spinning disks for like some of those workloads, or SSDs. The capacity that those large hyperscalers have to negotiate the right pricing, to build the data center, like to deploy the capability, access to bandwidth, to power, to real estate. The reality is that unless you really at the very top of the Fortune 500 listing there, no company has the same capability to do it like at the same cost efficiency. So now sort of a little bit of my opinion, I think it is cloud, the future is cloud, but we may end up with a cloud that is much more edge like centric, that has, and you can look at some companies that are thinking about a world where instead of the typical environment we live today, where there's like 4 or 5 like cloud regions, like on a specific like territory, like in there is maybe we end up with hundreds spread across the world, smaller size with some of the workloads they're still running in the larger centers. So certainly something that will continue to evolve.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I remember from yesterday we talked about big tech becoming bigger. To your point, like only Fortune 1000 or some of the big tech can afford these massive infrastructure requirement to be able to process all the extra data and all the extra regulatory requirements and all that good stuff. But then we talked about security on the edges, so enhancing security on your mobile device and doing a lot of that work on the edges where the customers and users are using. Let's expand on that. Do you see, and what are some of maybe probably examples of those security on the edge type thing that you do you actually think that's right? Because we had a conversation and people shared their opinion, but we never obviously concluded whether that's the direction. What is your take on security on the edge?
Yeah, I think the definition of edge is probably the controversy in that space, right? Because you could go all the way to say, no, the edge is my device. I'm carrying like a smartphone, so why not maybe go back to a client server? I mean, some of the listeners may be like, what client server? Like it's been 30 years. Like, but that's one of the maybe an alternative in there. What I think it's more likely, and it's happening already, is the use of sort of edge networks. You have a whole bunch of players in the space, right? They started with content delivery networks, CDNs. They evolved into secure CDNs, if you will, with like web application firewalls or WAFs, and now they're going like a level beyond that and providing a lot of compute. Started with just serverless compute, and now there's storage compute too on the edge with a lot of capability that's possible there, powered by technologies like Kubernetes and all of that good stuff. But I believe that is, I not only believe that's doable. We have implemented some of our capabilities, like at Okta, using edge components. We are working a lot on the space of fine-grained authorization, because if you think of authentication, you typically have when you sign in to an app, you sign in, your session may refresh like on a periodic basis. We may need to revalidate your session because of security, because of some attributes of your session may have changed. But authorization is such a different beast, right? If I'm on an app, every fine-grained authorization means that every click I'm on the app in there, you will have some type of like backend telling me like, yes, you're allowed, no, you're not allowed, show this button, don't show this button, show this post, don't show that post. So it's very high transaction rate, and the latency demands are, this is not 30, 40 milliseconds may not be acceptable. It needs to be very, very tight. It's a brilliant use case for edge computing. If you think about it, like you bring some of that data, you bring some of that capability as close as possible to the end user, to allow that like rapid transaction rate and low latency to be feasible. So I think for technologies like ours and others that may be that sensitive to latency, availability, and performance, that seems to be the right topology to move forward.
All right, that makes sense. Security on the edge could be one of the trends of the future for security space in general. Talking about trends, yesterday we had this conversation around how end users' expectations about privacy has changed. Maybe a decade ago, the notion that everybody knows your email address and social security maybe, and where you live, and you moved yesterday or last month, or you're trying to buy a car, or all that good stuff, or your preferences about content consumption being almost like a publicly available to anyone because of what's happening in with the data brokers, what's happening with everything that we share online. So there's this conversation around, is there even expectation for privacy from customers? Or are customers taking it, or end users are taking it on their own to use third-party apps to manage their data? So there's this notion of no privacy all the way to, yes, I want to have full control over my privacy. What are your thoughts around these changing customer expectations, and what would be the implications for a company like Okta?
Yeah, this is something we think about it. We think about it every day. At the end of the day, technologies like ours, both on the workforce and on the customer identity side, the technology has to be based on the premise that PII is of the highest sensitive type of data, like access to that, compliance with all the regulatory requirements, all of that is paramount. So the technology has to have what we call private. Our technology is built with privacy and security first, right? Like they have that embedded into every level of our stack. Now, of course, in the real world, I mean, the reality like hits how consumers think about what is the level of sharing, what is the level of access they are comfortable with. Um, it's something that is a choice, right? It's a choice of every like individual needs to be made. I will say though, and we had this really cool conversation yesterday around the TikTok problem that's happening right now. What was that word? I was looking at my notes here. It was like government of the United States of America versus like influencers being the challenge right now. But I will say though, and now it's more of like my personal take on this, having seen a similar movie before back in the late 2000s when Facebook was the cool new shiny toy. There was the same discussion, and back then we were not talking about the Gen Zers. We were talking about like the millennials, and like yeah, millennials don't seem to care a lot about privacy. Maybe we got past that. So maybe we may be seeing the same thing again. And at the end of the day, as the implications of a world where privacy is not respected become very clear, and the challenges of that, there's something is about fraud is having access to your social like number, which is being leaked like so many times already. That's one thing, but from there to going to an extreme where the information that I choose to share, the things that I choose to write like on a social media platform or not, that is still private, right? People still care about it. And I believe that as folks maybe get a little bit of gray hair in there, like they become more aware of that. Like as a parent, of course I care much more now that I have like a small like child like at home than I did when I was in my 20s, like using a type of social media that I'm not going to even name because I'm going to date like me if I say what I was using in my 20s here. But I believe the privacy is still very like paramount. And even though we may see this like small swings in terms of public opinion, I think it's a government's responsibility to like make sure that citizens are protected, like from that perspective. So I don't believe in a world where everyone just says that privacy doesn't matter because I get the value from my social media like by doing that.
Yeah, that's a good point. It actually reminded me of this conversation we had around there's difference between privacy, sharing your information, and criminality of using your information for, for whatever fraud that we can imagine. So I agree with you in terms of it's the responsibility as industry altogether that prevent those fraud. But then consumer preferences and level of comfort with how much data they share would change. But at the end of the day, the data should not be used at minimum for criminality and for doing things that people haven't authorized their data to be used for. That's a really good point.
Yeah, exactly. There's so much even someone very close to like to me in my family is being a victim of the sort of this very classic like WhatsApp like scam. Someone impersonates someone in your family, and with AI is able to send you some very tailored like messages, like some very tailored communications. Guess what? Like you just shipped a couple $100 like to some like random account, and because now data transfer, like money transfer, is becoming so easy, so simple to do it with many countries adopting, like Brazil, India, adopting this idea of like an instantaneous government-backed money transfer. Those things become hard to track because in a more traditional financial system, you do a wire, the wire can be reclaimed, like can be stopped, can be But now we're moving to a world like where the expectation that everything is instantaneous increases the exposure to those types of attacks. And it goes back to how what typically happens, right? Like humans in general will ask for convenience, will ask for everything to be fast, like immediately, right now. When something goes wrong, you're going to blame the government, like, for, so why didn't you protect me, like from this? So I don't believe that governments will exempt their responsibilities in this space. It's very different across the world, right? You have the European Union, like the European countries have a much more top-down capability in terms of enforcing those regulations versus like the approach in the United States with 50 states with various like levels of appetite for that. But I think directionally, I don't believe we are deviating from this like, too much.
Yeah. And that family of yours falling victim of WhatsApp, I have a very personal story actually to share, and then some sort of a conclusion for that from that for this conversation. Love to hear your take on it. So when I was running my own startup, obviously as a founder, you do a lot of things fast and you don't pay attention to a lot of details. And this is what happened. We were working with a vendor. The payment to the contract was two part. First part was supposed to go in. I received the invoice, ready to send. I got an email from the accounting team and said, our bank account information has changed. Could you send it to this? And I never thought about, I was going to do it quickly because the project is starting. I sent the money, past the due date. The accountants again reached out and like, we haven't received your payment. And I'm like, I've already sent it to you 2 weeks ago. And then truth behold, we investigated and we realized the accounting email was coming from a totally different person. But the only thing that's changed was they had an extra R in the middle of the name of that person. And somehow the vendor's system got breached. So they were able to send this email from an account that was not under control of the vendor. And I never thought about, could never kind of like seeing these kind of cases, never thought about calling and saying, hey, is this you? Have you actually changed your bank account? And a significant amount of money basically was gone in the system. And then what I was thinking to myself is that if my email provider could have sent me an email and said, this email is different from the email you've been exchanging information of, because we've been exchanging emails all over, right? So just like there was an extra R in that tag at the end. So it's almost like the responsibility falls obviously at the customer level. I should have checked it, but it would have been great if I had a little notification from my email provider to say, hey, this is not the same email you've been exchanging with this person all along. Almost like these things, it can be built into the system of day-to-day use. So even like the WhatsApp on this person is not verified, all that good stuff. What's your take on that? Have you seen any trends on like having those, maybe using AI, some of those right in time notifications when you are actually doing things that has some fraud sense to it?
There's a huge trend in, I wouldn't say like in identity, but identity is a component of that for, and there's technologies that allow a higher level of verification for financial transactions, something that is mandatory in the European Union. It's called SCA, strong customer authentication, like where every financial transaction that is higher than a certain amount, it is a relatively small amount. It's something like 30 euros or 35 euros, if I'm not mistaken. Like there's a different level of MFA that you're subjected to, where we have a final opportunity to confirm, like, is that really like you who are performing? This is the recipient that you're sending the transaction to. So he allows you to, because a lot of times it's about like an extra opportunity to look and reflect before sort of pushing the button. Some of the regulation is making its way slowly through over to North America too. But then you have this whole space of content, not even content, but content and identity authenticity. Like how do you prove, or how do you verify that the person on the other end is really who they're saying they are? There are technologies like mobile driver's license, MDL, right now, which is a type of verifiable credentials that, if it takes off, hopefully does, like here in the US, is being adopted in other parts of the world, like Australia, New Zealand, etc. Will be great, because then you have a government issued digital identity that has the right technology, the right protocols to allow verification and in a selective way. You don't have to show your ID that has a lot of information on you. But if there's a transaction that you perform with a certain entity, you get to prove that you're above a certain age. You get to prove your zip code or a postal code in there. So there's a much higher level of assurance to avoid some of these challenges that are happening around. And some of those technologies are powered by like AI, particularly in terms of content authenticity right now. So I believe there's a lot of forces that are like landing in the right direction. But like as everything else, these things don't happen overnight, right? Like they will take time. They'll take a combination of public sector, private sector, even citizens or the public has to put pressure, right, for these things to materialize too.
True. There's that education portion, and then there's also like feeling the pain. So now, because I felt that pain once, now if anybody asks me for any advice, like address change, like I always think second time before like doing changing the way I like transact financially, because now I had that pain of going through that whole process of trying to recover the funds and all that processes that goes with it. So yes, everybody has responsibility, including citizens and users, to be more aware of these things. Very good conversation. So I want to switch a little bit and talk about you and your background. I promised our audience your James Bond moment in your career. So we should talk about that. So, but maybe start from where you went, backward or forward from your career. I'd love to hear about your career as product leader, where you started, how did you get where you are, and some of examples of cool projects you worked on at DigitalOcean, and generally just a career path to become a technical product leader.
Yeah, I think the classic accidental product manager. I went to school to computer science way back in the days. I was born and raised in Brazil. I never thought I was going to be back then in Brazil in the 90s. Even the notion of a technical product manager wasn't a thing. Really, you went to school to learn to code, write some software, and next day you write more software. That was it. And you would become a manager, a director in the software group. So none of that was really like in my mind when I started. But like I said earlier, most of my career, I always gravitated towards like infrastructure. Like I racked and stacked servers like myself in a data center, like in Brazil, like at one point. Great experience. Gave us like a whole different perspective when you're thinking of when you spin up an EC2 instance today in AWS and you complain that it's taking too long. Let me tell you, taking a server out of a box and racking that in there and putting the cables on and installing Linux takes quite a bit longer than that. But I ended up in product, I would say, because of I'm always very passionate about understanding initially my internal stakeholders and then later on my customer problems. I always enjoy talking and listening like to people and writing those things down and helping engineering teams build it. So I became a product manager because of that, because of maybe I was very gravitated towards that. And the other thing that was huge, like for me, was that if I recall, when I moved to left Brazil, and I want to go back to what you're calling a James Bond story. It's like sounds really grand, but I'm going to come back to this because I lived in Europe for a little bit before going to Canada. I remember when I was interviewing after a year or so in there, my resume said something like IT operations manager or something, and the person across then became a friend. Was my boss for a few years. Like I'm on the board of his company right now, someone that I really like cherish the relationship. He kept telling me like, you're not an IT person, you're an engineer. I kept telling you like, what are you talking about? My title was IT for all my life. But there was a big difference even for me to realize that you either making technology as an engineer or you consuming technology as an IT, and that notion didn't exist in my mind, right? You only registered really when I moved to North America. But then from there I stayed in Canada for a few years. I moved to the US when I joined Apple. I was there for a little bit over a year, and now here with Okta. And I think the common thread of my entire career, other than the technical products that I always like stayed on, the other common thread has been problems that are sort of very hard problems. If you think about the DigitalOcean problem, trying to offer cloud computing at that scale and at that pricing point, competing with the likes of Amazon and Azure and Google, it's no small task. And they do an incredible job at it because of their developer relationships, right? The developer affinity, like how they speak the language of their of their users. So I think there's been a thread of I love problems that are the identity problem. Like when I joined Alt0 prior to becoming part of Okta in 2020, had a lot of these principles too. Very difficult problem to do at scale, at the right cost, pricing point, with the right performance, etc. So I love those those types of problems.
That makes a lot of sense. What I really like about your background is this, you almost have this technical thread in it, but then it keeps changing context and solving different kinds of problems, like scaling cloud. And then at Apple, I know you mentioned there are some projects that you can't talk about, which we respect at Apple, but I'm sure it was a totally different context. And then Auth0, and then Okta now managing the customer identity. And so we didn't talk about the James Bond moment, though. What happened in terms of
okay. Let's do that. So let me tell this, because yes, when we talked about this a couple of days ago, I didn't tell the whole story, but let me tell the whole story, because the whole thing sounds made up, but it actually all happened. So I'm in Brazil. I'm in the office. I get a call on my mobile. This is 2005. Yeah, 2005. I get this call. This number is from Germany. I would never, there was no reason why I should be getting a call from Germany on my mobile phone. I was like, okay, take the call. This person is calling me, claiming to be from Luxembourg. I had no idea that Luxembourg had the same country code as Germany at that point. I was like, okay, that doesn't sound. And then it's yeah, we're looking for someone to run this project for us. I was like, all right, tell me more. Yeah, we're building a small WiMAX service provider, WiMAX, old type of technology, wireless, high-speed bandwidth. And it has to do with, it's a military contractor that's hiring us. And we're going to build this in military grade containers, and that will be shipped to a war zone. And I'm there listening to all of this. And it's yeah, and in order to do that, you have to move to Prague, to Czech Republic, to work on. I was like, okay, what part during this call you want my credit card number? This must be a scam, right? You claim it from Luxembourg, you speak perfect American English. Fast forward, it was all very real. I landed in Prague on January 5th, I think, right in the middle of the winter, super cold. Being from Brazil, that was more cold than even my freezer could produce. In Brazil, it was a fascinating project. I worked on that for about 6 months. So we essentially build a fully functional ISP with a lot of the billing, because we were supposed to actually provide service to both military forces, but also to the population, a prepaid service. So we built the billing capability, the network, all the security stuff, and it got shipped on military containers. I made it very clear from the beginning that I was not interested in doing any of the deployment of that on the ground. I was happy to work here from the comfort of the office in Prague. But it was a fascinating experience. We ended up hiring a couple of military, a couple of vets from the UK, they were really curious, I guess, to get back to a place that was having some action in there, and they deployed that for us, on the ground. Yeah, I never thought I would be part of such an experience like that. So not quite James Bond, but pretty close, right, Hoda? Pretty close, man.
It is pretty close. Maybe the technology part of, I forgot the name of the person who provides technology stuff, all the cool gadgets and phones and things like that. Maybe you were that one to someone's James Bond. But it is a James Bond story. I really categorize that. It's just fascinating. To your point, waiting for a moment to ask for your credit card because somebody wants to book a flight and they need your credit card to bring you there. That's true. It's fun. Thanks for sharing that story. I was waiting for this because I'm sure everybody got a good laugh out of it. But I'm sure it was a fantastic experience for you, especially it was early on in your career. So you had this fantastic opportunity to do something super cool. Talking about that, let's talk about sort of like the past, present, and future of product management. You mentioned something at the beginning, and when we talked a few days ago around when you started, there was no definition of like product management as a function, didn't even exist. Now we see today this whole notion of product managers are CEOs of their features, like CEOs of a mini feature and the CEO of a product and then the CEO of the company. And we've seen a lot of chief product officers becoming promoted part of the C staff as a part of our CPO research last year. What is your take in terms of with everything you know and what you've seen in your own career, rise of AI, improvement of technology? How does future of product management do you think changes? Where the product management is going as a function?
Yeah, we clearly came from a world where the product manager was that one person that emerged from an engineering team that was the sort of the interface, right, in between like the folks building and the folks that essentially want to buy, like then providing some feedback on it. That's something we come a long way from those days. I think what's happening now, I think there's actually two opposing forces. There's this push for incredible specialization in product management because things are not getting any easier, any simpler, right? Even though we create more technical abstractions to technology, the number of problems that one has to think about it when you're building particularly a technical, not particularly any product like today, there's a lot of things, right? Like we talk about the use of AI, like how do you going to integrate those types of technology, both in terms of the user experience, but in terms of the potential automation capabilities and the security implication that he has. So in one hand, I think we have a call for more specialization. You go back, even this notion that you have a product manager or product owner, if you will, to one Scrum team didn't exist. You have a product manager for like a team of like 100 engineers, and that was it. Now it's like more specialization. But at the same time, the point you made seems to be also a trend where in the past, even when I started my career in product management was a function of marketing, of the marketing organization, which not necessarily bad or good or bad, but it's different. And now, like chief product officers in a large number of cases are also responsible for the engineering group, like too, right? So the product management function gravitated away from marketing into the engineering like organization, like looking after that. And in some cases, it's called a product delivery. In other cases, it's called a product delivery organization. You have ownership from the beginning to end of everything that will make your product successful, which in turn puts these individuals on an incredible position to ascend to CEOs or to like other types of C-level functions. Is that really how I see things in the future? Having been part of Apple for a little bit, it's such a different world at Apple because I see something there that disproves a lot of what I just said. Apple, the view of Apple for product managers is well known, is very different than what we would use at Okta. Most of companies would think about it. The engineers typically run like a bigger part of the organizations, and product marketing has a role that looks more like product management plus the marketing side of it. They're not big fans of product management in there. Apparently, like Mr. Jobs wasn't very keen to that notion. So I don't know if the future is the CPOs will rule it all. I would love that to be the case. Like it's on my wheelhouse. I think it's very selfishly good for me. But clearly seems to be the direction where we're going. In technology companies, you're essentially a product like company, right? And over time, you may become more sales led, But to succeed really in hard technical products, product is everything for you. You're trying to get product market fit. You're not trying to get sales market fit. You're trying to get product market fit first, right? So everything is very product centric, which is probably driving. But things change a lot, right? Like, what if we hit like a huge recession and a lot of companies get consolidated again under much larger enterprises that are much more sales driven? Like, that could be a push, like in a different direction. Um, yeah, those are my thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It actually kind of fits very well with another conversation that kind of I want to have to wrap up this conversation. I know we have you for another couple minutes, 5-10 minutes maximum, but maybe we can have a conversation around the differences between technical product manager and maybe B2C, sort of like user consumer product management, because what you're saying sort of resonates with me very well with talking to some of our sponsors who are more technical at products account. A lot of them have this conversation that engineers drive the conversation, or product managers who come from engineering background are extremely engineering savvy, and they can have that very deep technical conversation, are the ones who are driving the product, not the traditional MBA type PMs that can, do different, they have different level of skills, but they're not as technically savvy. Would love to hear your thoughts around like the differences and challenges of being a technical forward, technical first product manager, and how does that look like, and how is it that different from B2C consumer facing technical product manager?
Yeah, there there are lots of differences, and sometimes sometimes they are hard to pin to pin down. But I've had an experience like in my career of joining an organization and like to run the product. And as I look at the make of the team, and started to understand by talking to other groups, talking to the go-to-market or organization, talking to my partners team, etc. There was this feeling that your team spends a lot of time on what they call discovery. They just do a lot of discovery, and then double clicking on that, I think that was a huge part of the problem. Where if you are building a technical product, sometimes the discovery, you should just know the answer to that. Your experience, or you read a spec, or you look at similar technologies that have been implemented, but customer discovery may not make a whole lot of sense in the way that it does in consumer like apps. In consumer like apps, you do a large scale customer research, run a number of interviews, because you're really trying to get to that specific usability problem that your customer is trying to solve, that specific business problem. But in a technical product, you're not going to ask your customers around. And so maybe you find some customers that are going to be my technical, are going to be able to say that what is the acceptable level of think of security capability, like what's the level of false positives of a bot detection algorithm. If you send a survey on that, if you ask me, I was like, the acceptable level is around 0. I want this to be perfect. So you're not going to get the answers that you need. So you need to develop the technical acumen to be able to come to the right conclusions on that through like knowledge, experience, but not really that classic customer research. It's also something that you can do an A/B test. We're going to do an A/B test on the efficacy of like a bot detection algorithm. Like, maybe there's a creative way of doing it, but it's also different. So I think that's where things are, like where most of the differences like lie. The counter, not the counter, but the sort of the downside of that is that, and we see this, I've seen this multiple times, is that by not having the MBA capabilities or the expertise within your individuals, you need to have the capability somewhere else in the org. So companies will end up having product strategy teams that'll sit there and they'll provide that like that capability to fill a gap, because there will be a gap. You end up with your product team much closer to engineering, and you need that other capability to be filled. And the last thing I'll say is, again, I'm not a B2C person, so for the B2C listeners in here, like none of this is personal, but I find the B2 the technical product management capability or success, like in there, there's an element of subject matter expertise that is very crucial. It's very critical. How much fungibility you can have, particularly in very hard problems. If I think of some of my time, like at Apple, in the compute cloud computing internal problem, like in there, you're talking about a level of specialization that is very difficult to say, no, okay, you worked on this other networking thing, now I'm going to put you on the hypervisor optimization problem. Like, it's just not going to work. Like, the ramp time is going to be huge. You're just not going to be able to make that like that work. But I think those are the differences, like in here, that make for what could make someone, and for the people that want to transition, I've seen people transition from B2C and be very successful, like by finding something in common that the person was working on, that was a good safe harbor for the person to transition. I've also seen technical PMs that were much more interested in the funnel optimization like problem, like in the like very customer facing user experience, also make the move. But I typically don't see a lot of people sort of like straddle like the line and like move back and forth.
That's a great point. I actually, as you were talking about Apple, and then as you were explaining this part, I thought about that famous quote from Steve Jobs, and I'm paraphrasing, that customers don't know what they want. You can't just ask them to tell you what they want. So a lot of it sounds like on the technical side, that's the accepted notion, because you can't really ask them, what do you want? There's a problem that you're trying to solve, but then you have to come up with the solution. And technical, you can't just go and do discovery calls more to figure out the features. Decisions are made at the engineering and the product level internally as opposed to externally.
Yeah, it's a combination. Some of that is a spec they need to read. Some of that is being decided already. So why are we wasting time? But in a lot of cases, exactly what you're saying is, you could like figure this out. Like, there's no one to ask like that question.
Yeah. Well, we're coming to the last question of the day, and we let you go. It's Friday afternoon, and I'm sure you've been traveling all week, so we want to give you some time to rest. What would be one advice you would give to an early person in their product in their product leadership journey? So they just maybe have a couple of years of experience, but then they want to become you. They want to become CPO, SVP of product, CPOs of product. What would be advice you give that person in terms of learning skills, anything else that comes to your mind for them to accelerate their path to senior level?
Yeah, there's so many, but the one, and I'm gonna try to not be reflective on what happened to me because experiences are so unique. But one of the things that I see happen potentially more now than before, we live in a very anxious and impatient society right now, like for reasons that I'm not going to even touch like upon. But so if you want to become, I believe, if you're going to work on these hard technical problems and you really want to be good at it, it's going to take time. It's going to take time. It may take a decade, because there's depth of knowledge that you're going to have to develop, and you may need to go to get through multiple jobs in order to do it. You may need to see different points of view. Going back to cloud computing, you have the even in terms of like the compute problem itself, you have the AWS like virtual machine philosophy, you have the Google container-based philosophy. They're very different philosophies. If you want to be like really good at compute, you may need to experiment both of them, or maybe to spend a lot of time in one of them, because there's so much institutional knowledge and research that has gone into this that you're just not going to master that over a couple of years. And I see this anxiety of people look at a career ladder and it's like, I'm going to plan my career every year, like bang, 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 and I get to there. I think in our space it's hard. You're going to need patience, but I think the payoff is huge, not only from a compensation perspective, which is also very good, because those roles are very rare. They are always in demand, but you become an expert in your domain. The recognition that you're going to get, it feels great. It feels great to be able to really understand something at a level of depth like that allows you to solve very hard problems. So that's the one I think it comes to mind right now.
That's amazing. It goes back to that notion of, if you see yourself as a product, or if you see your career as a product, there's no overnight success. To your point, it takes years to refine it and actually to get a place that everybody loves the product and everybody using it. And it's also never stops in terms of like learning and growing and enhancement.
Exactly.
Well, with that, thank you for sharing your insights. Thank you for yesterday's roundtable. It was awesome, and today was great. And I hope we can have you back in this show and share more of your knowledge with the community. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Hoda. This was a great conversation for a Friday afternoon. This was awesome. Really enjoyed your questions there, and yeah, looking forward to doing this again.
Yes, thank you.
Cheers.
This is SC Moadi again, founder and chair of Products That Count. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you like what you heard, be sure to leave us a review on your favorite platform, including Spotify and Apple. And please check out our other resources at productsthatcount.org. They're designed to accelerate your product career and make product the most important function in business. Until soon.